and welcome to our Series 1 Last Live talk show of GlocalNet, portal of Global Complexity Network. My name is Connie Dost and I'm your host today. These programs and thus this broadcast are interactive, which means you can join us by active participation. By sending an email to info@glocalnet.com, you can reach the editor immediately, who will then try to get your question on the table. Today we're talking about digital money and identity. And joining me are Professor Lex Hoogduin, University of Groningen, and David Burge. Dave Burge is author, advisor and commentator on digital financial services and one of the top go-to authorities according to Wired magazine and many others. His latest book, Before Babylon and Beyond Bitcoin, examines the interrelationship between technology and money and is a worthy follow-up of his 2015 pioneering book on identity, Is the New Money. Welcome. So, money seems to be going full circle if we look back at its earliest history. Expressions of contracts in exchange for favors or work done, to today when we watch the rise of cryptocurrencies based on blockchain technology and powered by so-called smart contracts. The real essence and meaning of money might not have changed. Technology, however, drastically changes its impact and reach. Digital money is the layering of the asset and the value with data to create relevance. And when we top that with our identity, we create powerful, or not so powerful, reputations through life. In the next hour, we will ask Dave Burge to take us on a discovery behind his two recent books and debate with Lex Hoogduin on why we are moving from money that we understand to money that understands us. So, Dave, first of all, welcome again. We're totally pleased and honoured that you found some time in your hectic schedule to be with us. But before we launch into the table debate, let's see what you recently said on bridging the real and the digital world when it comes to money.
So having things in the virtual world that you can't copy, that actually makes the virtual world more like the mundane world.
Dave, let's go back to the basics. We both read your book, we love it. But let's start at the basics also for the benefit of our viewers. What is money? Is money an asset? Is it technology? Or, bring us back to the origins of where we are today.
Well, at the origins of money, most modern scholars would say, lie in debt of one form or another. And the technologies that changed debts into something you could trade, I mean the technology of writing, essentially, are the origins of money as we think about it now. So we have a situation where we had, whether it's for religious purposes or whatever other reasons, you had people that had debts to each other. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with Yuval Harari's *Sapiens* and the stories about the clan and the 150 people and this kind of thing. When you're in that environment, those debts of one form or another take the form of memories. There's Koshia Lakota said, money is a very simple form of memory. I can remember in my clan who I owe things to. You lent me your cow, so I will let you use my lawnmower or whatever it is. Actually, I wouldn't think primitive people had a lawnmower, but you get the general point. But those mutual cross obligations can be remembered. But that doesn't scale. Once you go on beyond your little clan, you need a technology to help people remember. And frankly, as we all understand, the origins of writing in ancient Babylon actually come from debts and financial accounts of one form or another. So when you say, so where does it come from? It comes from debts and the monetization of debts through technology, which means you can transfer them and so on. Are the origins of money as we understand it. But the point is that was a very simple, you could understand that. The average person in the street, the average person in ancient Babylon, could understand that kind of money. And my point is we still think of money in those simple terms, but money just isn't like that anymore, right? Because those debts related to tangible things. Yeah. And we no longer live in a world where those debts are anything tangible. And in fact, we haven't done since the 1970s. So the nature of money is different. There's a tension. The way people think about money is wrong. Most people now don't understand how money works or what it is, and they don't understand how radically it's changing. So that's the big sort of historical sweep of the book.
So what is wrong about how you reckon most of us think about money?
Well, I'll give an example. I was at a meeting in London a couple of years ago, and a journalist from one of the London news, an intelligent, educated woman, was asking me some questions about, which made it very clear that she thought that there was gold in the Bank of England, that somehow banknotes were related to some actual real. And she wasn't a stupid person; she's a very well-educated person. People don't spend much time thinking about money, they think about money, but they don't think about money. That's what I mean. So that's how most people think about money. They think it's a claim on something real. The truth of the matter is, since 1971, which was the big date for crazy digital money people, that was when Richard Nixon ended the convertibility of the US dollar into gold. And since that time, the money that we use, pounds, dollars, euros, are not backed by anything. There is no tangible thing sitting behind there. The only reason you accept euros is because you think other people will accept euros into the future. Now, that kind of money, the word for it is fiat currency, from the Latin fiat lux, let there be light. That kind of money, that fiat currency, I think people see as being a sort of law of nature or something that comes from physics. But it's not. It's a set of temporary institutional arrangements. It didn't used to work like that, and it won't work like that again in the future.
Okay.
And I think you have to add to that. I fully agree. But part of the confusion is that people don't understand where the money comes from, how it is created. They don't get that, let's say, banks create the money out of nothing, basically, and that's indeed what.
But when you say it like that, it sounds crazy. But but if you say to people, well, I don't know the figures for the Netherlands, but in the UK, I think 96.9% or something like that of all of the money in circulation, of course, is commercial bank credit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I go to Barclays to borrow £10,000 to buy a car, it's not like in Mary Poppins, Barclays are waiting for children to come and deposit the pounds until they've got 10,000. And
then give it to Mr. Birch.
They just make it up. They just change the numbers in a spreadsheet and create it.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying whether that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's how things work. And I don't think people understand how that works. But because of digitization, we have to think about those things again. And I think one reasonable comment on the current situation is that whatever you think about Bitcoin, whether you think it's viable in the long term or not, the impact of those technologies, and I have to say it's coincidental with the great financial crisis, because people's were more prepared to listen to alternatives, and dissatisfaction with the existing system made them ready to perhaps if Satoshi Nakamoto had existed 10 years before, it would never have had any attention. But it does serve a very useful role, whether you think it's a good idea or not, in making us rethink and re-examine, what do we want money to do? What is money supposed to do? I know what money did in an industrial economy, and I think we've all studied and we understand how money changed in the transition from a pre-industrial to an industrial economy. But what is money supposed to do in a post-industrial economy?
But I do think that the crisis indeed has triggered interest in this topic. And I don't know how it is in other countries. I know that in the UK you have positive money that focuses very much on this aspect. In the Netherlands we even had a play on how money is created and the role of banks in creating money, and there's quite some attention for it, but it remains, and I can understand that it remains difficult to really get that something can almost
it's true. People think that your money in a bank is somewhere in a vault and they just don't get it out physically, but it is definitely there. So let's move on from there, because in your book you also refer to the phrase that intrigues me and most of your readers, because that's why the editor puts it on the cover, from money that we understand to money that understands us.
Well, what I mean by that is that people imagine money in that old sense. So they imagine that a euro is a claim on some gold or something in a vault somewhere. But the point is, it's a piece of paper and we can sort of understand it. And it's dumb, right? A €100 note doesn't know anything.
No.
It has no memory. It doesn't know what it's being used for. That's not true when you start talking about things like Bitcoins and Ethereum and tokens and so on. A Bitcoin has a memory. A Bitcoin knows where it's been. A Bitcoin knows who's used it and who they exchange it for. It understands, and once you start bringing in some intelligence and some smart contracts, you can have very smart money indeed. All of a sudden you could have money which enforces the values of the community that created it. You could have money that can't be used to, I don't know, buy cigarettes or something, or whatever you're doing with it, or money that can't be transferred across national borders, or money that can only be used after a certain date, or money that can't be used by certain people.
Yeah.
You know, because money now, I mean money in the sort of Bitcoin sense, because that's programmable money, it can contain code as well as its memory.
But even the stupid digital money we know,
it takes us into different places.
Even the stupid digital money we know today has a level of memory around the bigger trade.
Yes.
So let's move over to you, Lex, because this series is all about complexity and uncertainty. So why does this whole idea of digital money thrill you, in the sense of, is it uncertain? Is it more uncertain than it used to be? Is it more complex than it used to be?
It's very fundamental. It's very fundamental. There's a very strong link between the existence of uncertainty and money, and why we need money and why we have money. Uncertainty in our company is defined as we have discussed many times, but it's good to repeat it, is a situation in where you cannot know all the possible outcomes of a certain decision. That's different from risk. For instance, if you flip a coin, you know that's heads or tails. You don't know which one, but you have a complete list. In the actual world, we do not take our decisions under risk, but we take them under uncertainty. And uncertainty means that you cannot have that complete list. Now, without going into the detail, but it has been proved mathematically in 1954 that if you take your decisions under risk, so if the world would be like flipping coins, that's a type of decisions, then you don't need money. You could determine all transactions at one point in time because everything is known. You know what everybody wants, you know what it costs to transport something. So money is not necessary there. So the human condition is one of uncertainty. And that's inevitable. We cannot get rid of that. And that's basically because we have the capacity to discover things, to learn. So we cannot know now what we will discover in the future. And it's always possible that decisions that we take now will be impacted by what we discover in the future. So you don't have a complete list. So you need something to bridge the past, the present, and the future. And then you come to that's far more traditional, we haven't mentioned that. Then you need something, a technology, an asset, that can act as a medium of exchange, that can help you to find the transactions and then enable the transactions. You need something that can bridge the present and the future. So you need a store of value, and you need something that allows you to calculate, to make your decisions. And you need a unit of account. So these are the three functions that money normally has. And then the importance is, I think we have so far, and as I read the fascinating book, there's a lot of emphasis, let's say, on the transaction part or the medium of exchange part, but it is also important. And that's where the role of central banks, for instance, comes in, and where you also have to think about, if you think about Bitcoin, for instance, that to fulfill the store of value and the unit of account function, your money must be stable in value. And that's something that doesn't happen automatically. And you need monetary policy, you need central banks, you need governments. And there's a lot of discussion of what you need and you don't need. And
we're going to come to that. But when you hear this, Dave, do you think that what Lex is sketching, will that become, will it become less tangible? Will it become more uncertain with digital money, or will it become easier to deal with those uncertainties with digital money?
It might be easier to deal with the uncertainties, but let me make one other point first. So just to illustrate what I think sometimes it's easier to use history to show the stories. So an example to illustrate what was just said then, if you take the example of pre-revolutionary France, so the circulating medium of exchange was almost non-existent. You know, these pre-industrial economies, there was no money in circulation, tiny amounts of it. The money that was the unit of account was quite different from the circulating money. In fact, in France, it was the king who could set the exchange rate between the unit of account and the circulating medium of exchange. And remember, there was a tradition of French incompetence in monetary policy that goes back. So the exchange rate would change twice a year, and nobody knew what was going on.
At a minimum.
But it didn't matter because there was no circulating money. These were trust economies. You had these webs of credit relationships with periodic reckoning. So in your village, the relationships, how you got bread from somebody and beef from somebody else and you gave somebody else, these were webs of trust relationships, credit relationships with periodic settlement. When that trust begins to drain out of the marketplace, which of course happened after the revolution, once people can't trust, then the demand for a circulating medium of exchange escalates, right? So as you have less trust, you have to have more money in circulation. If you had an economy in which, just to go to your point, you could resolve all of those trust, you could completely trust because you could calculate, you could have a kind of reputational calculus which would let you know the status of all these relationships. You're absolutely right. The medium of exchange would disappear from the marketplace. You wouldn't need it anymore.
Yeah, and I think there's another aspect. You refer to, let's say, France and the small communities in France. What money also enables is to really to broaden the group of people you transact with by having a medium of exchange.
Well,
compare it with pure barter.
Correct.
There you need what is in the economics literature is called the double coincidence of wants. So I have this glass of water, you have the book. I would like to have a book, but I only have a glass of water to exchange. So I have to find somebody who has the book and wants to have a glass of water. Yeah. Now I know that you have the book, but I'm not sure whether you want to have a glass of water and whether you want to exchange it with me. So if you have a medium of exchange, you would automatically accept some money for that book, and that means that the amount of transactions, the number of transactions and potential transactions grow exponentially, and that is then the relation with complexity. Yeah. So money allows an economy to become far more complex because there are far more interactions allowed by using a medium of exchange. And
you could argue, though, that technological change would mean, I mean, you can certainly construct scenarios where so you can eradicate the double coincidence of wants by using money as an intermediary. Yeah. But you could also eradicate the double coincidence of wants by having more information. So you could imagine if there was a supercomputer that everybody was connected to. So you want the book, you have a glass of water, that trade doesn't work, but actually somebody else wants the glass of water, they have some paint, they can give it to somebody who needs some oil, the guy that's got some oil gives it to the book, and you end up with the book. Now that sounds crazy when you're talking about the physical world, but those barter chains could be resolved in cyberspace in nanoseconds.
My problem is that, yes, you can compute much more with computers and in the digital world. But the point is that the data that you need to find out what has to be produced, where, by whom, for whom, are not data that you can easily collect, because they are mental data for a large part. It's your preferences, it's your expectations of the future.
That's correct.
And those cannot be stored. So I don't benefit a lot of having a supercomputer.
But the nature was it Hayek who called it the calculation?
This is Hayek and von Mises. They showed indeed that you cannot centrally plan an economy. No.
So the calculation,
because you don't have prices. That's a calculation problem. Yeah. And Hayek's point, that's closer to what we're discussing here. So there's too much information that's dispersed among many persons around the world, and it is mental.
But Hayek, the Austrians, they'd never heard of Facebook. Facebook knows everything. So the mental calculation problems can be subsumed into your reputational calculus across multiple
because we express our
networks.
behavior online. Yeah.
All I'm saying is money is one way of eradicating the double coincidence of wants. It's entirely plausible that technology provides another way. I actually think technology is going to push things even further than that. In the book, I like looking at what social anthropologists say about these things, because I'm a technologist, and so I need a bigger context to understand these things. And Jack Weatherford, who's a social anthropologist, who's written a very good history of money, he says money in the future is going to look more like money in the Neolithic age. And what he means by that is that when we're talking about living in the little clan and we all can all remember each other's things, we don't need money. We scale and then we need money. But now we scale to the point where we have networks that constantly, permanently interconnect us. So it's like living in the little clan again. Yeah. It's just you live in a clan of a billion people.
A billion people.
So it's quite possible that the technology is going to eradicate. You say, correctly, I focus on the transactions and the medium of exchange. It's entirely possible technology is going to eradicate that completely. And then you end up in this sort of Star Trek world where there is no money, where precisely these calculations go on in the background. I mean, I don't think that's much of a help to the ECB trying to plan for the next quarter.
Okay,
but I think the technology could take us in those directions.
I doubt it for the reason that I mentioned, because I don't see how you collect that mental.
Okay, well, I'm going to go the mental direction and bring you all back to earth a little bit. Because I want to talk about the other thing that everybody's always up in arms about, and particularly very recently, and that's identity. And as you know, we've spoken about this many cases. I truly believe as well, if a bank has your data, they can create relevance. Whether they do or not is another thing, but they can. When they have your identity, they can build a reputation for you, which you can trade on through life. But there's a lot more around that. People are worried about. When they hear identity, they think privacy. So how do you see the relationship between money and identity evolving in the future? Well,
look, you've just given a very good illustration there. So if you look at the proportion of average household wealth that was held in the form of demand deposits in a bank, 100 years ago, that would have been 90% or something. 50 years ago, maybe 50%. 20 years ago, maybe 20%. Now, I couldn't hazard a guess. In the Netherlands, 2%, 4%, I don't even know. Almost all of your wealth isn't in the form of money. It's in the form of stocks and shares and pensions and all sorts of things. So the amount of your wealth that's actually in the bank is inconsequential, right? Your checking account. So what is the bank really storing? I mean, the bank isn't really a place where you store money. You can store money in all sorts of places, and you do. Unit trusts and mutual funds and things. What the bank is really storing is your identity, your reputation. You could easily do the thought experiment, right? You wake up tomorrow morning and some mysterious comet has passed and all of your money has evaporated, all your money's gone. That would be annoying. It wouldn't be the end of the world.
To a degree, yeah.
No, but you would just call Lex and say, can you give me €1,000 for the week? I need to get by. It's not a problem. But if a mysterious comment came past and you woke up tomorrow with no identity, you'd be stuck, right?
Well, ask refugees.
Well, yes, quite. I didn't want to make the political point about it.
No, but it is true.
But you're correct.
Yeah.
So actually, it's much more valuable, much more important, a much more important role in society that the bank stores my identity. Now, as you say, they don't do anything with that at the moment. And I can give you a very simple example. So privacy is really important to me, okay? So why does the bank give me a debit card that has my name on it? That means when I go and buy things online, people know my name. That's none of their business. Oh. It should be up to me whether I give them my name or not. Why doesn't the bank give me a debit card that has no name on it?
It's just a number.
Exactly. So privacy is an integral part of that proposition. And seeing institutions in that context of identity and trust and reputation, rather than the intermediary of money, I think actually gives us a better sense of where they would go in the future. If banks are going to be just about money, they have no future. Yeah. Because Amazon will perfectly happily...
Tencent, Amazon, whoever.
I read today Uber applied in the Netherlands for an electronic money license this week.
Yeah.
You know, if banks are only going to be about money, they're sunk. They have no possibility.
No, I'm a simple monetary economist, so I'm trying to understand. I find it fascinating what you are saying. But first of all, what is identity? What do you mean? What is being stored? What exactly?
The 3-minute version, Dave, not the 3-hour.
Because if you were to ask me the relation between money and identity, I would give a completely different answer. Because I come from the point that money is an aspect of a nation, of a sovereign. And it is part of your identity as being British or being Dutch. Money is a part of that national identity. And you make it very personal and you relate it to it being stored at a bank. So what do you see as identity?
I see money as more like an airline. You know, I mean, we used to think that every country had to have an airline. And now some countries don't have airlines, some countries have lots of airlines. You know, the link broke. We used to have national we don't anymore.
But what is identity? What's then identity? How do you...
Identity in the sense I'm talking about there is you have an identity. That identity in this case was given to you by the government when you were born. Because of data breaches and privacy violations and spying and the modern world we live in, what I want to do is I want to take that identity and I want to lock it up in the bank vault. I want the bank to take care of that for me. And then I want the bank to give me tokens, if you like, the equivalent of what would have been money in the old days. And that's what I use to transact. And those contain no personally identifiable information. If I need a token to go into a bar, then that token should say that I'm over 21 or over 18 or whatever it is in the Netherlands. That's all. It shouldn't say my name or address or anything else.
But why store that? Why store that at a bank? Why not a private vault in which?
That's a very good question. Now I think, and there are people that will give you a different answer. Okay, so there are people who think that these is self-sovereign. So there are people who think we should take control of our own identities like that. Personally, I think I'm too irresponsible to be put in charge of my own identity.
You don't trust yourself.
I don't want the responsibility to have to look after it. I want my identity locked up safely in the vault of a regulated institution that is accountable under the law, and where I have what we would say in English, an expectation of redress. If something goes wrong, I expect something to be done about it.
But isn't this...
If I have to look after it, what happens if I drop my cryptographic keys and the dog eats them? Then I have no recourse.
I have two questions. First of all, isn't this a very limited definition of what my identity is? Isn't that also my accumulated experience, what I've done in the past? Or is it all part of what I store?
I mean, the identity in the sense that I'm talking about it there would be a kind of key to link to those other things. It wouldn't be...
A key to identify you.
What I would call your data footprint, in my head, is not quite the same as identity. It's a different thing. I also think that in response to... I mean, we're talking, now when we've just had the scandals about Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, and we have GDPR coming in Europe, very general data protection regulations where people are going to have to think a lot more about personal data. I mean, now is a good time to try and rethink this in a concrete and positive way. If banks can take that burden away from people so that they look after your personal data and keep it safe and sound, they provide a very useful function in that post-industrial economy. Being a place to temporarily store small amounts of money really is not that valuable or interesting. And
that's my second point. So I've stored my identity, and then I get tokens. Who determines how many tokens I get, and what can I do with these tokens?
Well, the banks. That's in my scheme. I'm old. I think banks should run this. It's perfectly viable to say, a la Bitcoin, well, we don't want institutions. We'll just let everybody take care of this, which I think is catastrophic misreading of what a market is and how regulation works. Because if you don't have those institutions, you basically privilege the rich and unaccountable at the expense of everybody else. So I'm old. I would like banks to do this because they're regulated, but other people could do it. You could have a situation where Google and Amazon and Facebook play that role, or who knows, we might end up with Baidu, Apple, Tencent playing that role. The big retailers, they haven't really utilised the new technologies in many ways yet, and yet they do have people's trust, and they are touch points where people go. So yes, there are other candidates. I think I'm...
But there's no redress with the retail shop.
It's fair to say that it's my bias, it's my hope that banks will fulfil this new role.
Yeah, so the total amount of tokens in circulation is in the end is determined by the collection of banks. Because I'm
well, there's different kinds of tokens. So if you look at yes, I'm using the word token to mean very generically about different kinds of things.
As an expression of something.
But there's lots of, I mean it in the sense of something which links to some underlying asset, but itself isn't the asset. There are lots of different kinds of tokens. So if I'm talking about a cryptographic token that proves that I'm over 18, that's very different from a cryptographic token which is my car, or a cryptographic token which is a fraction of my house, or so on. I agree with you, there are lots of different kinds. I don't see that as a complexity argument, because we live in a world we have computers and laser beams and smartphones that can take care of all these things. Yeah. So I don't think that in itself is a complexity argument.
But would it going back to the functions of money, I don't think that changes, because the underlying uncertainty, I think, is inevitable. Yeah. So you need people need something that facilitates them to calculate.
Well, the long term, I think, is going to change dramatically, because the long term requirements are not served by the units of account that we have right now. I mean, I can argue, with I think some reasonable grounds, that so if you look at really long-term pensions, for example, so I put pounds into my pension scheme because when I retire, I'm going to want to heat my house or
whatever.
Well, you could argue this is very inefficient. You know, if I need so many kilowatt hours per day, why don't I just put kilowatt hours in my pension plan? Why don't I put cubic meters of water?
Because you don't know. You don't know exactly.
But I do know. I know exactly how many kilowatt hours I need to heat my house. I don't know what pounds are going to be worth.
Maybe that there are new techniques that allows you to do it with far less than you could ever imagine. That's why we have an anonymous unit of account.
I'm going to stop you guys here, because before we go, and I agree that this is incredibly interesting debate, but let's think about some normal, real people, you know, who live in a normal world and who don't...
Like us.
Like you guys and me. Because here we are. You're talking about pensions. You say, well, you don't know how much you have. Well, in all fairness, I have a pension plan. I have no idea whether they're ever going to pay up or whether they will pay up and how much. Because in all fairness, the boards and the governors of those pension plans are older than I am. They change the rules all the time, and you don't know what the economy is going to do. So I think that's as uncertain to me as another scheme. But let's go back to normal people, because we talked about blockchain technologies and what they can do. And we know that the next generation, thank God, is looking at other schemes. But let's for a minute look at what you said when we were talking about trust and we were talking about blockchain technologies and how it has an impact on everybody in society, not just the bright and the good and the knowledgeable, but everybody.
If I want to operate in a community where the money's completely anonymous and I might get cheated and it's my problem to take care, fine, right? But sooner or later, your grandma is going to press the wrong button on an email and all of her money is going to be transferred to somewhere in Eastern Europe.
Yeah. I mean, you know, people who are blockchain foodies will sort of not like this very much. It is complicated.
Okay, so this is why...
complex, maybe even, Lex.
It is complex. This is why I think... So the anonymity issue is very problematic. The people who are the big fans of cryptocurrencies, to them, this is one of the big selling points, that you can't be censored, that the man can't stop you from sending money from A to B. And and you can see their point. I understand the sort of concerns. I mean, an example they'll quite say is a friend of mine was living in Argentina a few years ago, and they had capital controls. And so she was one of the very early Bitcoin users because they used to use Bitcoin to move money in and out of Argentina. And that sounds cute and fun and whatever, but that's a democratically elected government. I mean, you might disagree with their policies, but it doesn't seem right that if I just disagree with some government policies, I can just take it on myself to ignore them.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound right to me. And there is no real requirement in society for anonymity, for the obvious reason that anonymity protects the rich, the powerful, the unaccountable, the oligarchs. It means you can't hold them to account.
No.
Anonymity doesn't benefit ordinary people like us. It benefits the powerful. The requirement in society, I think, is for privacy. So privacy is our right that's circumscribed and defined, but in some cases can be overridden. You know, if I'm a suspect in a murder case, it seems quite reasonable for the police to be able to go to the bank and say, well, where was Dave yesterday? You know, what was he spending money on? So I feel quite strongly that we need better, stronger notions of privacy, which we construct, and then we make the digital money of the future obey those rules. We don't create the digital money of the future like Bitcoin and allow it to set the rules for the rest of society.
No.
Society should set the dial. This is where we want the privacy.
Yeah.
And then we, the technologists, should be implementing it. So I feel quite strongly that we haven't quite got close to that kind of, you might call sort of institutional settlement between people and the institutions and the government about how it should work.
Well, and exactly, and that's why I want to go to you, because we had this debate before where we say you cannot stop technologies from developing. They will carry on regardless. But who should sort of bear in mind this sort of ethical question? And do you, Lex, as an ex-sort of central banker, see a very good role here for either politics or central banks or market infrastructures, or maybe something totally new? I mean, who should be at the front of this ethical debate?
We all, ethics and law is something that evolves, where everybody who wants to be involved can be involved, but that's where I think it touches on one of the core problems. If you think this through, because Dave, you said a couple of times we have to set the rules. The question then is who are we, and via what process, and how does that relate to? Can there be a community setting its own rules, or should it be the government? But then you get a tension between, let's say, potentially between the government and the community. You even said at a certain point, society set the rules, but society
you have to assume that the government's doing the right thing.
Yeah, so...
Well, there are tensions there, which I mean, this is a valid point. I have no answer to it, of course, because Lex is correct about this. Like, how we get the necessary education and focus to make these decisions, I have no answer to that. You know, we have a situation right now where the policymakers, the politicians, really don't understand how any of this works. I'll give you a very straightforward example, which is anti-money laundering regulations. We have 4 AML, we've got 5 AML coming. We have the most stringent anti-money laundering regulations there are, and essentially they stop approximately, I couldn't even hazard a guess, 1% of money laundering, 0.1% of money laundering. London is the money laundering capital of the world, despite having the strictest anti-money laundering rules there are. But we live in a modern world. We live in a world of blockchains and computers and biometrics and so on. So why are we trying to build these walls to keep the bad guys out? Why don't we just take the walls away and let everybody, and then we can use the supercomputers and the bots and whatever to monitor the transaction flows and use big data and machine learning and AI to try and spot the criminals. There's this kind of mindset that needs to change from thinking of money in these almost Victorian ways of thinking and thinking about electronic money. In a new electronic money world, I don't want the bad guys kept out. If I keep the bad guys out, I have no idea what they're doing. I want the bad guys in the system using the money. Then I can track and trace and monitor.
Find them.
But then the question remains: who is regulating it?
Yeah.
And who is setting the rule via what process?
Well, I think in an ideal world, that would be me, basically. But I can't quite figure out how to make that come about.
Yeah. So we have a fan on the table who loves your recent book. So here you go, first compliment in. And he loves the discussion, and he had a number of questions. I'm going to take one of them, and it's what is your take, as we were talking about stability, and what is your take on the need to have a limited amount of bitcoins in circulation? Is it deemed necessary by cryptocurrencies and enthusiasts to have this scarcity to make it survive? Or is it not more important to provide and keep confidence in the currency over quantity? So, is the limited quantity, is that the holy grail, or should we let go of that?
My personal, I'm against, so the deflationary nature of these limited, some people think that's a good thing, and I understand why they think that's a good thing, because they think it leads to a certain kind of price stability. I think they're wrong. But I think inherently we don't want deflationary currencies. You end up with this Wall Street versus Main Street clash that's come up time and time again in history. You want money that's under society's control, I think, because sometimes things go wrong. You need to have quantitative easing sometimes.
Here we are really at the core, I would almost say, of the history, not of, let's say, money in as a transaction enabler, but money as a unit of account and a stable store of value. And it's exactly what Dave says. There's a continuous tension between, on the one hand, it is true that if money would be in unlimited supply, it would have no value. So it would be literally valueless. So that's why.
We have fine examples of that in today's world.
Yeah, and in history, many examples of that. So you need. As it in jargon is called, there should be a limit to the elasticity of the money supply. You cannot have it expanded limitless. That's why I, during the debate all the time, ask who is determining how many tokens are in circulation, because you're sure it doesn't work. Now, the fascinating thing about Bitcoin for a monetary economist is that in Bitcoin you have this not unlimited elasticity. There is a limit to the supply, if I understand correctly. In any case, you cannot at will expand it. Still, what we now see, that is not sufficient for creating stability. So the interesting thing is you need something more. And then the point is, I haven't seen yet an algorithm that defines a supply process that contributes to stable prices. The Bitcoin formula definitely doesn't do it. Still, simply having a rigid number doesn't work, because sometimes there is additional demand for money, and there are problems, and you have to expand the money supply. So we are looking for an holy grail there, and you can see monetary history as a debate or a battle between, on the one hand, having sufficient rigidity so that it cannot be abused, because it's of course very profitable to expand the money supply, and on the other hand, having sufficient flexibility. That's what we're trying to find. And if let's say the digital techniques or the technology can help us to find better solutions there than we have discovered so far, I think that these techniques not only contribute to further reducing transaction costs, but could have far more potential than that.
Yeah, I think you can see several, I mean, speaking from the technological side rather than the central bank side, I think you could see several paths forward here which could contribute to stability. So just a couple. So one is the kind of ecological argument. So the ecological argument says when you have one version of something, whether it's money or anything else, one type of banana, one virus can wipe out the whole thing. What you need is a lot of different diverse kinds. Well, actually, the nature of these new monetary technologies means we could have hundreds, thousands of different kinds of money, and the ecology overall would be stable. Because they would be in constant adjustment. So technology could take us in that direction.
May I interrupt? I wonder whether that's the right analogy with a biosystem. There you are right. Biodiversity helps resiliency. But if you look at it in terms of standards, if everybody would have his own standard for length, we would have 70 million meters. That wouldn't work. And I think the problem here is, and that we have seen in history as well, if you have different monetary standards which can fluctuate against each other, that creates uncertainty about what the actual value is if you transact with somebody in another community. So there's a lot to say to have not too many.
True. So if my wealth is in US dollars, then the value of US dollars against other things is a constant worry. But if my wealth was a basket of different currencies and commodities and all sorts of other things, then you have a different kind of stability.
So what were your other two routes?
Oh, well, personally, I think that one highly plausible short to medium term theory is that things like Bitcoin aren't really the new money. What they actually are is a method of obtaining a secure infrastructure that everybody has a share in.
And a huge experiment as well.
But what it is secure. Whether it's stable, it doesn't matter, but it's secure. And what you implement on top of that, people talk about the smart contracts and the tokens and so on. So actually those currencies, the ledgers, actually form a base layer, a secure base layer, on which we actually build the tokens.
Yeah.
And then you have institutional arrangements which link the tokens, the assets in the real world, to the underlying ledgers. And those institutions, let's call them for sake of argument, banks. Those institutions would maintain that. Why would you do that? Well, because that turns assets in the real world into bearer instruments that can be traded on the ledgers without any clearing and settlement. And that leads to highly efficient liquid markets, which I think there are strong arguments for saying would in time come to dominate. I was at Money 2020 in Singapore a couple of weeks ago, and I had the great honour to interview Jonathan Larson, who's head of corporate venture capital at Ping An, on the main stage there. Ping An is one of the giant Chinese investment companies. And he said, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but he said essentially, once the token markets are regulated correctly, and we see the germination of this with the new Swiss FINMA rules and so on, once those markets are regulated properly, he said essentially they will tokenize everything. Because those efficient markets where you have this constant adjustment of prices, the constant trading, but without clearing and settlement, are a better way to assess the value of different assets against each other. So I think I can see ways that technology can lead to that stability. I think you're right, the stability doesn't come from us all using Bitcoin. Apart from anything else, deflationary currencies are a really bad idea if you're trying. So if I have Bitcoin, you think about the pie chart. About a third of all the Bitcoins that have ever been mined have already been lost. Yeah. Right? The dog ate them, you threw away the hard disk.
Which is a real life example, as you remember, from Vincent's wife.
These are real examples.
Dog ate the quote.
So those are gone. About a third are in the hands of a very small number of people. Yeah. Bloomberg says 1,000 people. I mean, I've heard some people saying that as few as 40 people own a third of all the Bitcoins. There's the Gini coefficient of Bitcoin makes the US look like North Korea is the thing. And the rest of us are just peasants scrambling over the other third. Well, if you're one of the 40 people that owns all the Bitcoins, why would you ever want you would never spend a Bitcoin. They would never have any utility for you because you're going to hoard them. Because over time, because it's deflationary, the value of your holding will go up and up and up and up. That doesn't make any sense for the new economy.
But I also think in that sense, is the Bitcoin has become almost old-fashioned again, to my idea. It's a bit like the 1980s, where it started on a libertarian idea that it should be transparent, access for everybody, trust created by the network, whereas really it's become a speculatory tool.
Actually, well, because
for the few.
No. I mean, because I'm old, I do see it in that sort of historical context. So, in the 1980s, when we started to think about these kind of things, and then we began to implement in the 1990s using smart cards and this sort of thing, we had a situation where people began to think about what in those days we used to call digital bearer instruments. Yeah. What if cryptography and networks and allow us to construct these digital bearer instruments? That would lead to a different kind of economy. And then you have these Szabo-style smart contracts and so on. And it all didn't work. DigiCash was founded right here and it never took off. But actually, we're now circling back round because now we do have the technologies, and actually the mobile phone has got a lot more to do with it than the blockchain. Yeah. But now we do have the technologies that some of those ideas, whether it's Edward de Bono and the IBM dollar, or it's Chaumian or it's Szabo contracts, we now have the technology to make some of those things actually happen. And I do think there are different paths to stability.
For the stability part, I have two questions on the fascinating vision that you started with a couple of minutes minutes ago. First, on increasing the speed of transactions, almost instantaneous transactions. I think we do not even begin to understand what the implications for stability are. We every now and then in a still slow world, as it were, we see that in the equity markets you get these crashes where nobody understands what's really happening, and you have no control. You have no time to react. The human being is no longer there. So I'm not sure whether it's an unqualified blessing to increase even further increase transaction speed. And then the second point is that in the limit, basically you go then to a world where we started, a world where you collapse all transactions at almost one point in time. Because I see the process for spot markets that you can do it. You can get rid of clearing and settlement altogether. But now we have a 50-year swap outstanding, and that continues to be
roll over.
To be cleared all the time. And in the meantime, things can happen that we cannot forecast. Again, the uncertainty. So somebody can go bankrupt. So for the clearing function, which goes to my heart because I'm at LCH, so I'm biased. But I do think that there is a logical argument that yes, you can get rid of clearing of spot products, but I don't see how you can ever get rid of or want to get rid of clearing of longer term derivative contracts.
I agree with that criticism. So is it the case that the complexity that would come into existence from this continuous liquid market and thousands of different assets and tokens would have some unexpected consequences we can't understand? That's certainly true. And could I guess what those will be? No, I can't, because I don't know enough about.
No, my question, I think that's the basic question that runs through.
But what would we do to address that? Coincidentally, happens to be the subject of my next book. What would we do to make markets work more effectively? I think that argument has a lot to do with transparency. Remember, the regulators are going to be AIs as well as the traders that are trading. There's all going to be bots. Which interesting is for banks. I think they haven't really. Right now the bank sells things to you like pensions and mortgages and so on, but they're selling them to you. And because you have no basis for choosing one over the other if you're a normal person, because nobody can understand pensions, you buy it on the basis of brand. Yeah. And brand serves its traditional function as a substitute for incomplete information.
But you said that even regulators over time will be bots, robots.
Right. So
driven by artificial intelligence.
When your bank is
without human intervention.
Right. So that means when you're selling a pension to me, you have 100 years of experience as to how to sell pension. But when you've got to sell a pension to my bot, that's a very different story. Yeah. My bot's not interested in your stupid advert or what colour your branch is or. You know what I mean?
And here, this I find a frightening prospect, even if it's true. Whereas in the end, what is missing is the human being. In the end, this all should assist a human being in making decisions. It's not that we want to substitute a bot or a robot or whatever, completely automatic decision making.
Exactly
a human being cannot be automated.
I'm not smart enough to choose the right pension. I don't want to choose my pension. I want a super intelligent robot to do it for me. I don't want to do it. I want somebody smarter than me. It's the most important financial decision I've ever made in my entire life.
But how does that? But how do you know that the robot?
Because of transparency. So if we use,
but it's also a matter of preferences. Again, if how much do you want to pay for a pension? How much do you want to pay for a pension compared to for healthcare?
I have literally no clue. That's why I want a bot to do it for me. Those are those questions.
And you can tell the bot.
But you wouldn't.
Yeah, but if you do that, then the human being starts to intervene in the process. And I think
can we get off of bots for a moment?
I'll give you 2 minutes.
Okay, let's just go back to my point. So my point is to answer Lexi's extremely good question. So, how do we deal with the complexity that comes in? I don't know.
No.
how do we try to make markets work better in these circumstances? Personally, I think that has a lot to do with transparency. You know, if you read up on the crash and these asymmetric information markets and all this sort of thing, it could be that one of the key impacts of, let's for sake of argument call it blockchain financial services. Yeah. Maybe those markets aren't cheaper to operate, maybe they're not faster, but they're potentially more transparent. And it could well be that the way forward to deal with some of these issues is that very transparency. Because I mean, I don't mean transparent in the sense everybody can see everybody else's business. I mean, it's not, you know, you have a more sophisticated cryptographic infrastructure.
No, you mean level playing field around the data that's available.
Well, and also so that, you know, because the regulators can look at the patterns and the trades of what's going on as well. They can spot things like that. But also the fact, I mean, it's counterintuitive what you can achieve with this kind of cryptography. So you can have a situation where my corporate accounts, I'm a bank, my corporate accounts are all on the blockchain. The cryptography means that you can absolutely prove that my assets exceed my liabilities without actually being able to read any one of those assets or any one of those liabilities. You can do clever things with cryptography that are counterintuitive. There's like the thing about proving the attributes without giving away any personally identifiable information. So I don't know the answer to your question. But my feeling is that the transparent nature of those markets, what I call in the book occasionally, this issue of ambient accountability. You're trading in an environment where I mean, not so far, I wouldn't go as far as say code is law, but where actually I can't sell you a stock I don't have. It just you just can't. The code doesn't exist to do that.
No, you can't retro.
And so I do
fix it.
Although I can't answer the question, I do have some optimism that it can be answered.
Okay.
If you see what I mean.
Well, we're nearing the end of the program, and I think that we are going to definitely continue, and I hope that our viewers are going to dive into this whole subject a great deal further. Let me just throw a very short 1-minute answer, please, to you both. All of this, will this be the end of the nation state? Are we going to see other communities emerge where people create self-trusted networks for Manchester City Football Club, everybody who loves a cat, everybody who does international trade? Look out, 10 years. It's you know, it's playtime now for 1 minute. Who's first? Lex.
I do think that there is a real possibility that we will have more, let's say, communities, digital communities, that you are a member of many more communities. Whether I, however, don't think it likely that these communities will run their own money, if I may still call it money. I do think that the nation state at the moment is very powerful, and money is also power. So will resist a transfer of money to other communities. At the same time, I do think that the current monetary systems have their own problems. So there can be a scenario if these problems really lead to, let's say, a dramatic outcome, a collapse of monetary systems, which is not very likely, but also not impossible at all, that we then enter into scenarios where alternatives may come up, because it's necessary. You have to find a solution, and that could then be the outcome. But I think the most likely development, as far as I can see, is that central banks, as part of nation states, will adopt some of the new technology for their own benefits.
1 minute, Dave. This is a challenge in its own right.
Well, I think nation states are a relatively recent invention, like central banking. We didn't used to have them. We probably won't have them in the future. Or we may have them in sort of pageantry terms. And the reason is because the technology is inherently decentralizing in nature. The question is what level it will decentralize down to.
Yeah.
And I can certainly see situations where, I mean, I'll pick a deliberately provocative example to make people think. 10 years ago, Catalonia could not decide to have its own money, right? It's just infeasible to print the notes and coins, and everybody would have to have two. But tomorrow, if you saw in the newspaper that Catalonia has decided it's going to do a Bitcoin fork and have its own money, and that's the only money you can use to pay taxes in Catalonia, you wouldn't be surprised.
You wouldn't be surprised.
So I think the answer is there's going to be lots more kinds of money in the future than we have now.
Okay. Well, let's see. We have the last word, as it should be for our honourable guest, is yours. Let's see.
If we're moving into this era where the money itself is much cleverer and the money is much more closely linked to communities, that makes money work in very different ways. But the way of thinking about that is much more where we came from.
So, this concludes the program today about digital money and identity. I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. So thank you very much for your active contributions and your responses. And of course, thank you very much to our faculty, Professor Lex Hoogduin and David Birch. Thank you so much. Stay tuned. I'm Connie Dorrestein. Goodbye.